All right. Welcome back, class. I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving break. Crazy to believe that this is our second to last week. Um, so we're getting close to the end. I'll kind of talk about some of the things that we're doing to wrap up. This week we're reading the articles on family communication. I think they're pretty fun. I think you should enjoy them. So we'll kind of get into that as well as usual. So to start, in the semester reminders. Um, so podcast two is due Friday. So if you haven't already been in contact with your group, go ahead and um, reach out to them. It's the same groups as last time. Um, so we should basically be doing all of the readings that you have done since the last podcast. You're always free to refer back to um, the readings from before. Um, but yeah, I think there's a little bit less structure for this podcast because of the way the semester is sort of organized. So responding to the two books and then the family communication readings. So it might take a little bit more preparation on the front end to kind of coordinate with your classmates about what you found interesting in each of the books and what you want to be sure to talk about. So be sure to do kind of the legwork before you record. Um, that's necessary so that you can all kind of be on the same page. Coming up with those sort of topics as we discussed last time about what kind of makes a good podcast. This is something that it comes across when I'm watching these podcasts. Um, if you have prepared topics or not, it is evident if you have things that you want to talk about, or if you kind of just go around the group of saying who has something to say, and that reflects on your grade. So this is something you should take seriously. Then the podcast response will be due the following Friday. Weekly reading responses still due this Friday and next Friday, and then the final paper is due on the 14th. Um, you can find the directions for the final paper in your syllabus. Basically, the idea behind this is find a communication theory, an interpersonal communication theory that we didn't discuss in class, and then apply a philosophical lens that we did discuss to it. So that can be that we're talking Levinas this week. We're going to be reading Gunkel next week. It could be either of the books. It could, we read Stewart early on. So I'm happy to answer questions about that. I'll post a list of possible theories and kind of links or short descriptions of what they deal with. The other thing you can do is if there was something that really kind of grabbed you. I know a lot of people really liked face theory. Um, that I'm also okay. Email me if you want to do this, but I'm also okay with you saying basically, no, this theory that we looked at, I was really interested in. I want to apply it in this new setting. So, we looked at face theory, if I remember correctly, um, in terms of friendships, in terms of friendships. Um, if you say I want to think about face theory in terms of family, that's okay. I'm okay with you doing basically a theory that we've already talked about in class. Um, but email me so we can kind of talk about what the specifics are. Let me know what you're thinking, and we can kind of go from there. So, I think that's pretty much it. Should be pretty straightforward. The final paper I can talk more about next week as well as kind of questions come in and we wrap up the semester. But that's what we have left. We're almost done. So going into the readings for this week. The first one is the Kerner and Fitzpatrick reading on towards a theory of family communication. So this is kind of your sort of archetypical social science kind of theory building paper, right? So they go through and give kind of these axioms, right? This is what social science tries to do, is find laws that govern. But the big question is, how do families communicate? And this assumes that families communicate differently than other sort of entities and relationships. And basically, they want to go through this sort of parts whole dynamic that families are different than other relationships because, as they say, they kind of share a history and a future that extends beyond the individuals. It's not just a collection of persons, that there's this kind of whole that you're already embedded in, and that changes how you communicate. And so they do this kind of parts whole thing with sort of specific relationships, relationship types, and then the families. And they give this kind of chart on page 87. Um, but well, so the specific relationships. So this is your relationship with your father, with your mother, with your brother, with your sister, with your grandparents, whatever it might be. And those are, not only governed by basically what roles you play in the family, but with that specific person. So they give an example of someone who has a sibling that's really sensitive to comments about their appearance or their dress. Um, and so this, that's not something that's generalized then to all. I think all siblings, that all siblings are sensitive about that, but that's that person. That's a relationship specific thing. But then there are sort of above that one kind of higher level of abstraction, relationship types, that siblings have a particular kind of relationship with one another, just as parents and children have particular kind of relationships with one another. You think about the ways that you interact with different people in your family. That there is this sort of relationship type of maybe grandmother, that just biologically you have two of them. Now, there are specific relationships. Your relationship with grandmother A is not your relationship with grandmother B, but they both fall into that relationship type. Sort of same with siblings, even parents. Obviously, you only have one set of parents. But you can even think about situations where this then sort of gets expanded and complicated, like where a parent remarries, or is in a relationship with someone who is not sort of biologically your other parent. Then in that new sort of relationship, that specific relationship, you have to negotiate. Does that person who is sort of in this new role, do they fit into the relationship type of father or mother, though not biologically being in there? Part of what these authors are working with is, well, part of the way you answer that is what's their relationship to this shared history and future. That it's much sort of easier to accept somebody as a relationship type of a parent, if they share in your sort of future, in that sort of kind of existential way. We'll get into this with Levinas. And then on the highest sort of level of abstraction, there's families, right? There's not only relationship types. Oh, you're only saying that to me because you're my brother, you're my sister. Oh, you would the parent is only parenting that way because they're only talking to you that way because you're their child. There's the family. You think about so and so is really, my family. So and so is really acting like Alindia right now. Back, with this was the first time for Thanksgiving. I've got three brothers, and one of them was kind of back home with his wife, with everybody around, for the first time since they got married. And I kept saying, this is a big part of Lindia culture. That's family stuff, right? It's not the relationship specific. It's not even the relationship type. It's not the type of relationship of siblings. This is something that we do as a family, even higher level of abstraction out. And so Kerr and Fitzpatrick say basically this is how we understand communication within families. That first you say something to someone in your family and you interpret it in terms of the specific relationship. The brother saying something to the sister, the parent saying something to the child, not as brother and sister, but as Johnny and Susie. That it's first of all the specific individuals. And then when you can't understand, well, I don't understand why this specific individual would say that particular thing, then you go up to the next level of abstraction. That's what this little chart is demonstrating. So then you say, well, maybe they're saying that way because they're playing the role of a sister. And when that fails, then you go up to the family. Well, maybe that's a family thing. Maybe that's a family culture kind of thing. And basically, they say this is sort of how you interpret communication in a family. Um, they then go on to make basically this taxonomy of this highest level of abstraction of family types based on sort of the levels of conversation and conformity. So they list out four different kind of possible outcomes. So there's first the consensual family that's high in conversation and high in conformity. So the family basically all kind of acts the same, but everything is explained, everything is discussed, everyone is kind of on the same page and therefore similar. The next one is pluralistic, high in conversation, low in conformity. This is kind of, the family doesn't all do things the same way, but everyone knows why everybody else acts in this way or in that way. Um, Next one would be protective, low in conversation, high in conformity. You think about this is well, why should I do that? Because I'm the parent and I told you to do so. That's the sort of protective model. But it doesn't have to just be parent-child. Think about, with your siblings. Well, why are you doing that? Because I want to. Low in conversation, high in conformity. Everybody kind of does things the same way, and it's not necessarily discussed why. That doesn't mean it's not known why. It's just not part of conversation. Um, and then finally, the laissez-faire, low in conversation, low in conformity. Everybody does their own thing. Nobody talks about what they're doing. Uh, so that's Kerner and Fitzpatrick. I think it's a pretty cool piece. Kind of a good example of how you would build a social scientific theory. It offers a lot of answers, and its kind of goal, as the social sciences do, is to kind of decrease uncertainty, to basically give more or less a prescriptive model, which can be helpful in explaining things, but also it can kind of stifle some of maybe the creative freedoms of existence. So going forward to the Allen piece. So Allen gives kind of this big overview of family communication, talks about big D discourse versus little d discourse, and how those sort of terms are used in family communication, and kind of using this stage metaphor of, is discourse an actor, is discourse a prop, is it a personal prop, is it a stage prop? Some cool stuff with kind of metaphors in this piece. The general idea and difference between big D discourse and little d discourse is big D discourse is kind of um, what's out there, the possible ways of speaking, and the ways that the possibility of speaking inform our minds and the way that we think about things. So I was kind of surprised that Alan didn't make this connection, but like the idea of in family communication, even the concept of family, even the roles of family, like in language, there, not every language has the same designators for each familial relationships. Some, in English we talk about uncles and aunts, and it doesn't matter if you're on the mother's side or the father's side, that all uncles and aunts kind of have the same label. But there are other languages and cultures where those are given different labels. That this is sort of big D discourse. That we're able to talk about families and what constitutes a family. Um, Not only based on sort of the limits of our language, but also how that language is kind of put to use in conceptualizing, well, what counts as a brother, what counts as a sister, what counts as, X, Y, and Z. Little d discourse is how that's put to use in particular local contexts. Um, I was in Target the other day, and I passed by sort of a family, um, and I just heard the tiniest little snippet of their conversation, but it was so perfect for this class, where it was seemingly a grandfather, a father, and three young boys, and the young boy said, well, they're referring to the other two boys. Well, they're only my stepbrothers. And the grandfather tries to come in and correct and say, well, but you're all friends, right? And the father then comes in and corrects the grandfather and says, no, they're all brothers. And here you see this is little d discourse, right? You see three different ways to conceptualize relationships. That there's on one level, stepbrother, which implies a certain kind of relationship. There's another one, friend, which implies another kind of relationship. And then there's the third level of brother, which of course implies something different than the first two. And that what's happening in this moment is they're all negotiating how do we understand ourselves as a family, and how do the words that we use contribute to that understanding. That in some ways, that what the grandfather did with friends made it more intimate and less intimate than what the first boy said with stepbrother. That stepbrother still implies a level of family, but that step seems to put some distance between him and the other boys. And friends, well, you're intimate with your friends, you know your friends, you love your friends, as opposed to just sort of having this obligation to a stepbrother. But but then what the father says is brothers, is that's even more. You can um, a brother is there for life. A brother is there. You can lose friends, have a friend break up, but a brother is always there. And so even this little d discourse, how this language is being used within the limits of big D discourse, that's kind of the paradigm we're working with. So that's cool stuff. That's not the coolest stuff in this article. Um, but kind of this is the idea. What role does language have in families? Is it something that families use, or does it constitute families? The family and target's a good example of this. That it is both something that you use, and by your use you constitute what your family is. That how you describe yourself and your family then has impact not only on how you think about your relationships, but sort of in how you then enact them. So the cool stuff is sort of at the end he starts to talk about this French philosopher Bruno Latour. And Latour is known for this theory called actor network theory. And actor network theory is basically Latour's kind of pushback against some sociologists, who start kind of appealing to the social. Well, why do you do this? Oh, society says to. Oh, why do you do this? Because of the social milieu. And he says, well, the social is this sort of amorphous thing that's not really defined. Um, and he says there is no social per se. That what you have is you have actors, human and non-human actors, doing things, acting on one another, and this is what constitutes society. So there is basically no sort of ideal, as in it's basically this idea of McDonald's, for example. That McDonald's is not only the legal documents that constitute the company, it's not only the people in the boardrooms talking about it, it's not only the people um, sort of in the sort of restaurants that are taking orders and cooking and all of this, but it's also the grill. It's also the spatula. It's also the building. It's also the corporate boardroom. That all of these things, the humans and the non-humans, work together to constitute what we experience as reality. Now, this is a really kind of cool turn for families, because I'm thinking about ways that we integrate human and non-human actors into your family. And anyone who's watching this and thinking, well, we don't have non-human actors in your family, think about if your family has a pet, or if you know families that have pets. This is a non-human actor. That I mean, people literally think of their pets as part of their family. And part of Latour's point is that these non-human actors then change the constitution, of these families. So, or well, of society, and then in this case of families. Um, but think about, when you adopt a pet into your family, then roles and responsibilities change. How you act has to change. That somebody has to take the dog out. Somebody has to clean up the litter box. That there are now new actions that get introduced that change dynamics. And if you don't think they change dynamics, then you've clearly never been the child, as I was, that was grumbling and complaining as you had to take the dogs out in the cold in the middle of the night. Now, animals is one thing, but you can think about this even in a more expanded way of well, what about other non-human actors that constitute families? You can think about the way that the layout of your house has an actionable influence on what your family is. You can think about something like the vacuum cleaner, or like the Roomba, the automatic vacuums. That's another interesting one. How does that reconstitute the family dynamic? Um, Food, what you use to make the food. Um, what you can see how important a non-human actor like a hot water heater or a toilet or whatever kind of hardware thing it is in your house, how important that non-human actor is when it breaks down, and all of a sudden you and your family are in the cold of a house that doesn't have any heat together. That changes the sort of the familial dynamics. So this is the turn that Alan makes of saying it's not just about discourse, it's not just about language, but there's also sort of these material, non-human actors that contribute to the constitution of what it means to be a family. Okay, last one. Levinas on pluralist existence. This is one of my favorite pieces all semester. It's really short, pretty hard. But what Levinas is doing, he uses the word paternity here, and he talks about father-son relationships, but I think it extends to all sort of instances of parent-child relationships, although perhaps not the other way, perhaps not child-parent. That's something you can think about in your reflections or in your podcast. Um, but basically, Levinas characterizes parenthood as a responsibility that precedes commitment. So this idea of a pluralist existence is that basically the relationship of a parent to a child is that where the dynamic of care, well, maybe even obligation to the child, is not one that begins with an I, with an ego of a parent saying, I am committed to caring for you. Then instead, um, that it's something that makes a claim on the parent, that the parent sort of has almost no agency in the fact that they care for their child. Um, I think about this. I mentioned last or 2 weeks ago that I've got well, he's almost 8 months now, in the other room, an 8 month old. Um, and I remember, sort of after he was born, people were asking, especially people who knew that I was into this passage from Levinas, asking about that. And I said, it's interesting because in every other relationship that you have, you basically can give reasons for why you love that person. Um, even with a romantic relationship, which in some ways is similar, that you can always say, well, I like the way that they, I like their sense of humor. I like we share interests, whatever it is. But with the child, it's simply that they exist. That their existence is what makes a claim, and that this now is has altered the way that I exist in the world. And so Levinas kind of describes this here, and in other places, as a concern for the future of the other that I cannot abandon. So when you think about how you're concerned for your own life, that you're thinking about your future, right? That this is why you're in college, because you want to learn something for the future. You want skills for the future, and that this is why people do whatever is this sort of future orientation, because you're always aware that you have your own future. Um, that pluralist existence, that this sort of relationship is now a concern for the future of the other, that is the same kind of concern that I have for my own future. That this concern for the other's future that I can't abandon, just like I can't abandon the fact of my own future. This is where Levinas kind of makes the statement that you don't have your child, but in some senses you are your child. And then he says, though the is here is not the is of Plato. And what he means by that is this sort of second part, the identification of the other, that is frequently used as sort of an equivalence. That when I say I am my son, I don't mean that we are the same. That's not what Levinas means. He doesn't mean that I sort of have this possessing of my son, that I get to mold him into what I want to be, but instead that we both exist in this sort of projection toward our future, and that my projection to my future is now it exists plurally. I'm now not only concerned for the direction of my future, but I'm also um, concerned for his just as much. That it's not about turning him into who I want him to be. That instead it's about negotiating the fact that I exist now not only concerned for my future, but also for the future of another. Um, that's pluralist existence. It's cool stuff. I hope you enjoy it. So that's it for this week. The 3 articles. Let me know if you have any questions. As always, be sure to reach out with your groups, and I look forward to logging on next week for our sort of last video together. Have a good one.